Sean, hey, it's Paul Chestnut. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. And how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's always great to be with you, Paul. I appreciate you having me on today. You give me a little break in the shade here at practice today.
How's the family? Everything good? Everything good?
Everything's great. Yep, everything's great. It was a really fast first year, and I can't believe we're already starting our second football season here in Gainesville.
Well, why don't you share with us, how was that for you, making the transition there first year as the voice of the Florida Gators?
Paul, I lost you for a second there. Could you say it again?
How was that first year for you, year number one, as the voice of the Florida Gators?
Well, I tell you what, the fans and all the staff here couldn't have been more welcoming. It's just such a great atmosphere to be around all the time. And sure, I would have liked to seen or called more wins than perhaps we had there in year one. But for me, it was a kind of a scramble and drinking from a fire hose a little bit. But the orange and blue now wears nicely and fits just right for me. And I still am encouraged by what's going to happen here moving forward with, not only Coach Napier, but Todd Golden and the men's basketball team too. And then, of course, we had a pretty thrilling baseball season to kind of end year one. So I would say it was everything I wanted it to be, and I know even better times are ahead.
Well, Sean, what can you share with us? What did you learn about Florida Gator Nation in your first season?
Well, I think I learned that, there was a couple things. One is I think that the way that Florida runs their entire athletic department and the way that, the main teams, the ones that I deal with, are very pro-like. So that felt comfortable coming from ESPN. And, of course, before that, as you mentioned, the Pelicans and the Saints. So that felt comfortable and loved the rhythm of it. I guess I still am getting used to the impact of Gator Nation in that, just in the state of Florida alone, there's over 3.3 million Florida Gator fans. It is the number one sports entity in the entire state, more so than the Bucks, the Jags, the Miami Heat. It's the most popular amongst all of them, and we're blessed in our state here to have so many teams in all these markets to root for. So I think that sometimes I have to be careful and not, and in just remembering, Paul, that I'm not just broadcasting to Gainesville, Florida. It's the entire state of Florida, all the way up to you guys in Pensacola and beyond. And so when you look at the sheer numbers and the rabid interest of this fan base, you have to be mindful of that. And look, I'm very appreciative of that too. But I think I've learned that that's a bigger thing than even I could have imagined coming into this year.
Well, Sean, as you sit there watching Florida Gators practice as we speak, first game set for at Utah. What are you expecting? What do you think? Can you share with us what do you expect? I mean, a team that the Gators did beat last year. What are you expecting in that first game?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I haven't studied Utah a whole lot yet, other than I know that they're going to contend for, the Pac-12. It strikes me here with all this talk going on about realignment and the moves that have been made. Is this the last time the Florida Gators in football will play a Pac-12 team? It just kind of blows me away a little bit. But I think that with regard to the Gators, I think the Gators are better than people think they are. Are they contending for anything just yet? No, I don't think so. But I think they're better than maybe the prognosticators have sent forth to us. So I think this defense is markedly better from a year ago, and there's high-impact transfers involved here. I think that they're a young ball club on the defensive side, and they'll rely on some young defensive secondary guys early. And then on the offensive side, you bring back, two great running backs in Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, and you had a transfer from Tulane by the name of Cam Carroll, and then Ricky Pearsall so far, Paul, in camp has been unguardable. I mean, he's leading a pretty good little receiving core that is also pretty young. Some new freshmen are going to have to contribute. Marcus Burke's going to have a bigger role this year. Caleb Douglas is another guy that has taken a big step. And, Willie Jackson's son, Khalil, has taken a giant step from last year, too. I think number 22 is one that you'll see often on the field offensively for Florida. And then, obviously, it all revolves around an offensive line that has some question marks. and I think they're going to be okay. They're anchored by a veteran center and Kingsley Aguakin, and then right behind those guys is a new quarterback for the Gators. And while Billy Napier hasn't named a starter yet, I think all signs are pointing toward Graham Mertz as being QB1 for Florida. 32 starts at Wisconsin, and he's had a good camp so far.
Yeah, can you share with maybe a little bit more what you know about Graham Mertz, then, type of player that he is, and the type of person as well off the field?
Yeah, he's a true gentleman. He's mature. He still has 2 years of eligibility left this year and next. So this is not a 1 year, Graham Mertz era that we're looking at. We're looking at, one for sure, and then we'll see how it plays out the following year. When the class of 24 rolls in. But I think in talking to Shane Matthews, my partner on the air, former Gators quarterback, he finds Graham to be highly intelligent. He throws a very nice ball, good touch on it at the right times, has the deep ball ability. And Paul, the thing that strikes me is, again, 32 starts, that's a lot. And just the way that he leads this team, how he moves his guys in and out of huddles, his footwork, his practice regimen, all those things speak to his experience. And there's a calm or a confidence or even both when he is out there with that first unit on the practice field right now. So I think we're going to miss the explosive plays that we got at times from Anthony Richardson last year. But Mertz may be the more consistent guy, and that's not a bad thing either. And, yes, Richardson completed just 53% of his passes. I don't expect Graham Mertz to be at that number or below. I think he's higher, and I think it's opened up the playbook as a result as well for Billy Napier a bit.
Sean, you mentioned about on the defensive side of the ball that there are a lot of young players there. Can you maybe share with us a player or two that has stood out, or maybe Coach Napier looking at for a lot of leadership this year on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, leadership's going to come in different forms, and one of them is going to be a vet, actually, by the name of R.J. Moten. He's transferred from Michigan. I think that he's carried himself well. Guys look to him. Speaking of transfers, a young man named Taraja Mitchell comes as a former Ohio State captain. And again, that veteran experience will help. But then, you get a little young on the edges. Devin Moore is going to be probably somebody that factors into that defensive secondary rotation. Miguel Mitchell's another guy. A young man by the name of Castell, young, but probably will see significant playing time. And then, when we're talking about young guys, sometimes that means experience too. And so you may have a guy that has some experience but has been put in a new spot. Scooby Williams might be one of those guys that would fit that mold as well, as far as a bit inexperienced and maybe in a new position. But I think he's fared well. And then, look, you've got some guys on the edge that are going to make a big jump. Princely Umami-Ellen at one edge rusher. Justice Boone will be another guy that factors in as well. And they're bigger. They're bigger at tackle now. You got a couple transfers. Caleb Banks is going to factor in there. Des Watson, who's still north of 400 pounds but moves much better for a guy his size. He's going to help plug up that middle. So it's starting to look more and more like a Billy Napier roster in that they'll have the second biggest offensive line in the SEC, and certainly there's more girth and size up front defensively too.
Sean, I remember when Billy Napier, he made the trip last year before his first year there to Pensacola. I remember he talked about the transfer portal, name, image, likeness, and he wasn't worried about it. He said, hey, we got good people here. We got it covered. And my question to you, I just want to get your thoughts. Has the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness been good for the Florida Gators?
In some ways, and I think in some ways it's too early to tell yet, but I think they filled a lot of needs via the portal. I think they've got their NIL situation, and again, it's this strange relationship between the athletic department and those that will handle the NIL piece, in that they're partners, yes, but one can't dictate the other. And so I think they're in much better shape than they were 8-9 months ago as far as having that just right. And I think that just in talking to guys on our staff, that I think Florida feels like they're in a position to compete in that market with the best in the country. Now, is there room for improvement? Yes. And I think everybody's still kind of trying to build the airplane while it's flying, and that's the case across college football. And certainly, Florida's not any different than anybody else. But Billy's used that portal to get more Billy Napier guys in. Paul, if you think about last year's team, the best players in the team were guys that Billy brought in, coming into his first season. So more of that, please, the way I see it. And I think in a lot of ways, this has been a bit of a, extreme home makeover type show, but the roster edition. And you'll have to get a program when the season starts to kind of figure out who a lot of high impact guys are. And then, of course, there'll be some of the guys that return from last year too. But this has got a good culture going right now. There's a spirit about these guys. They're engaged with one another much more so than I saw when I first got here last year.
Yeah, and there you got the horns going off in the background there. I love Billy Napier. I definitely think he's the right guy there for the Florida Gators. Really impressed with them, and I think it's going to be a matter of time for him to really get the Florida Gators going. What do you think overall when you look at the schedule? You talked a little bit about it, Utah. What are your thoughts about the schedule overall?
Yeah, it's a difficult schedule, and it only gets harder in 2024. But, to open at altitude in Salt Lake City on a Thursday night is going to be a bit of a challenge. Going up against a team that you basically kind of almost ruined their season from the start last year. So they are waiting for the Gators to arrive at the University of Utah. And then, you get a couple of the non-conference games in there. None of them are layups, but I think the game against Tennessee here on a Saturday night early in that schedule tells us a lot. And then as you progress through the schedule, there's no break really. I mean, if you look at the timing of the Florida-Georgia game that's going to come up in Jacksonville, and then that leads into November that, features road games at LSU, at Missouri. This is not a kind schedule to a second-year program under Billy Napier.
You see a bowl game, though, for the Florida Gators this year?
I think so. Shane Matthews is a little more optimistic than most. He nailed it last year. He said, we'll be lucky to get the 6 wins, and that's exactly what happened. Shane is pretty high on this group. He thinks 8 or more wins. I think I'll go with Shane at 8, maybe 7's a little more realistic. But again, going back to what I said earlier, I think this team is better than people would think they know about this group, and a lot of it has to do with the new players and Graham Mertz and what will that look like. But I feel better about things than I did even a couple of months ago, just watching some of these guys develop and then obviously getting to see the impact of the transfer guys too. So it's hard. This is the second week of training camp, and at some point here, I'll stop trying to figure out what I'm looking at because I'm going to need to see it against somebody else. So the good news is if you want to have a gauge on this team, you'll get it early. Obviously, with the Utah game and that Tennessee game pretty early. So we'll go from there, and we'll hope for good health too. I think the Gators are still a little vulnerable at some spots. A key injury could be a hard turn on the season, and we'll hope that we can avoid that over here.
Sean, hey, before we let you go, I got to ask you about the College World Series. How was that for you? Because we had a local kid locally over at Pace High School, Brandon Sprode, who second time got drafted there by the Mets. Just what was the experience like for you?
Yeah, it was outstanding. I got real close with that group of guys. I loved that baseball team, and to see them be able to compete for it all was very gratifying for me. And so, Brandon was a part of one of the best pitching staffs in the country and was the Friday night guy and had been for over a year by the time we had gotten to Omaha. So I wish him nothing but the best, and just a great young man too. And I think he reflects a lot of his teammates in that high character, hard workers, never would go away, and that, served them well, obviously until the very last night of the year. So obviously they would have loved for it to go on a different way, but I'll say this, anytime you can go to Omaha, it's a treat. I would also add that this year's College World Series I thought was loaded. There were so many good teams up there in that final 8, and it made for some really exciting college baseball. up in Omaha, and I would expect several of those teams to be back in the mix again, come next spring, and I'm hoping Florida's in that number 2.
Sean, thank you for doing this. I know you got a busy schedule. I mean, we pulled you away from practice there, but